Here's a liver, very low power. It does seem to have a fair amount of hemorrhage here and there, some expanded portal tracts. But perhaps the most interesting aspect of the liver is right here, where you have liver parenchyma. That seems okay. And then some compressed plates of hepatic parenchyma around this. Here you go. And that picture plays out over and over again. Here's another little nodule. Here's another one right there. And between the nodules, there are these compressed plates of hepatocytes. The reticulin stain is particularly pretty. Here you go, nodules. And when you look at the periphery of the nodules, you'll see some compression of the hepatic plates at the periphery. You see it again here, and if you look for it, you see it throughout the liver. This is the nodule, and you can see that these plates are somewhat compressed, while plates out here in the center of the nodule are far more open. And finally, the trichrome stain, not too much to write home about. Perhaps a couple of the portal tracts are expanded, but there's no bridging fibrosis. The nodular architecture is again quite evident. This, I believe, is more collapse than true fibrosis. So this is indeed nodular regenerative hyperplasia. The nodularity is fairly obvious even under very low power, which isn't always the case on an H&E. Often you require a reticulin stain to uncover these nodules. So here they are. Here are the nodules. These nodules are composed of regenerating hepatocytes. And if you take a really close look, you'll see that the regenerating portion of the hepatocytes, these hepatocytes, are large. And as you come to the periphery, the hepatocytes get a lot smaller. So these hepatocytes here are a lot smaller than the hepatocytes here. These are essentially the regenerating hepatocytes, and they in turn squish the non-regenerating hepatocytes, creating this very nodular appearance. This is, of course, precipitated by oxaliplatin, and often with oxaliplatin, but not with other forms of NRH in my experience, you see a hemorrhage, particularly in the non-proliferative, non-expansile portion of the liver is where you tend to see most of the hemorrhage. You'll see that the rest of the liver doesn't look too bad. Here's a portal tract with a little bit of inflammation, but there's no steatosis and there is no steatohepatitis. Here's another nodule, squished liver at the periphery associated with hemorrhage. To make a diagnosis of NRH, you absolutely must perform a reticulin stain. And in this particular case, it was fairly obvious on the H&E, but the reticulin stain brings it out even further. So what you do need to see on a reticulin stain is these open plates at the center of the proliferative nodule. And when you look at the periphery of the nodules, you'll see these squished plates. And that gives it that nodular appearance. So wherever you look, you'll see open plates in the center and squished plates at the periphery. It's particularly prominent here, where you can see these squished plates of hepatocytes between nodule 1 and nodule 2. In other areas, it can be somewhat more subtle, but I'll draw a couple of nodules for you. Here's a nodule, here's a nodule, here's another one. And the more you stare at this, the more nodular architecture that you will appreciate. This, of course, is a diffuse process throughout the liver. And finally, by definition, you should not be seeing significant fibrosis on the underlying liver. So it's a nodular liver without significant fibrosis. Perhaps some of these portal tracts are slightly expanded, but not very much fibrosis, nothing to write home about. The trichrome stain again shows that nodular architecture, nodule, and then the atrophic hepatocytes associated with a lot of hemorrhage. So the bottom line is no significant fibrosis on the trichrome stain. Now you may well say, why am I showing you a PAS diastase stain? And it's fascinating. I've often found this with NRH, that the nodular portion of the liver will lose its PAS positive junk, while in the periphery, so I almost like to think of this as new liver. So there's none of that cleanup crew in the new liver, but the periphery represents the old liver that was somewhat damaged and hence the cleanup crew. So when you back out on low power, you notice that nodular architecture, and part of that nodular architecture is created by the presence of these PAS positive macrophages at the periphery of these nodules, where they accompany that atrophic liver parenchyma.